The first sign something was wrong came when my access badge stopped working for the executive restroom. The same week, our new CEO, Ryan Mercer, approved a $14,000 order for branded LED mood lighting in the lobby. Not for clients, mind you. For internal morale. That was the moment I knew this man wasn't just reckless. He was dangerous. 9 years. That's how long I'd been the backbone of Noventa systems. HR, payroll, compliance, lease negotiations, vendor management, even building our first investor deck while my son was home with strep throat, sleeping beside me on the couch as I typed through the night. No promotions, no stock options, just the eternal startup gospel. We're a family. If that's true, I was the exhausted mom who paid the bills, cooked the meals, and still got blamed when the lights went out. I remembered signing the very first office lease under my own LLC when Noventa was just 5 people and 2 folding tables in a co-working space. We had no credit back then, no leverage, so I used my small consulting company, Lauren Pierce Consulting, to secure the building. Everyone forgot about that detail, including me, until recently. Then came Ryan, parachuted in by the board like a Silicon Valley savior. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect LinkedIn buzzwords. He talked about realigning core competencies and injecting culture velocity in meetings that should have been about payroll and invoices. He replaced my Friday operations reports with something he called the Culture Pulse, a pointless survey disguised as productivity. It was clear, he thought I was outdated, too steady, too invisible for a man who measured leadership by how many Slack emojis people reacted with. Slowly, I started disappearing. He rerouted my direct reports temporarily, ignored my meeting invites, and when I logged into email one Monday morning, my signature no longer read Director of Operations. Just Lauren. No explanation. No memo. Like I'd been demoted to barista in residence. When I asked him directly if he was sidelining me, he smiled like I'd asked for a juice box and said, "We all have to evolve." If you've ever worked under a man who thinks disruption is a personality trait, you'll understand the taste of that moment. Bitter, metallic, humiliating. Then came the reshuffling. He held closed-door culture recalibration sessions, which, translated, meant plotting which veterans to remove. The new chief people officer wore designer sneakers and referred to layoffs as talent transitions. I didn't argue. I documented. I screenshotted. I saved everything. One day, during a presentation titled The New Noventa Ethos, he put a slide up that said, "Lauren is legacy. Legacy is liability." I didn't cry. I took a screenshot and saved it in a folder titled Ryan's Greatest Hits. My coworkers noticed. Quiet apologies in Slack DMs. Sticky notes on my desk that said, "We see you." But I stopped fighting. Outwardly, I smiled and nodded. Internally, I started cataloging every contract I'd ever signed, every clause I'd written. Because if you work in operations long enough, you know that paper is power. Then, one late night, I found it, buried in an old Dropbox folder labeled HQ Lease 2015, the original lease, not the new sublease, the first one. And on the signature page, the tenant wasn't Noventa Systems. It was Lauren Pierce Consulting LLC, signed by me, filed by me, never amended, never reassigned. I sat there in my downgraded cubicle beside the server rack and stared at that PDF like it was a live grenade. My LLC, my lease, my building, and Ryan, too busy hosting leadership vibe syncs, had no idea. The next morning, while he was probably polishing his LinkedIn post about synergy, I printed that lease and slid it into a new folder titled simply Insurance. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet, but I knew this much. He'd made one fatal mistake, assuming my silence meant surrender. It didn't. It meant I was preparing. The clock had started. Once I knew the lease was still under my name, I couldn't think about anything else. Every staff meeting, every fake smile from Ryan, every passive-aggressive Slack post about embracing the new era just pushed the thought deeper into my bones. The floor they stood on legally belonged to me. I didn't sleep much that week. I went through every document on our old shared drives, the ones buried under 5 generations of renamed folders. I found everything: the incorporation filings, the vendor contracts, the early bank applications, even the first employee handbook I'd typed up myself. Each one had my fingerprints all over it. I started saving copies to an encrypted drive, labeling them methodically. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. I was gathering proof. When you're a woman in operations, people assume you're harmless. They forget that the person who keeps the receipts is the one who can burn the house down. Then Ryan announced a leadership refresh. That was his euphemism for cutting anyone who'd been there before him. He stood in the boardroom like a preacher at a TED Talk, his sleeves rolled to show the CrossFit scars on his arms, a faint tattoo peeking out that probably said grind. "This isn't about removing anyone," he said, while the slide behind him showed an org chart with my name buried 3 layers down under something called Operations Support Liaison. No reports, no authority, no seat at the strategy table. Just a polite exile. I didn't even get a formal notice. I found out when a 22-year-old admin handed me a stack of printed timesheets and said, "These go to you now, I think." That same week, I was asked to book catering for the next executive retreat. I used to run those retreats. Now I was picking sandwich platters. My calendar went from project launches and audit deadlines to refill soap dispensers and replace coffee filters. I wasn't angry. I was focused. Every small humiliation was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and their control. Then one afternoon, I overheard Ryan in the break room talking to his new product head, a guy who'd apparently built an app that rounded up people's spare change. They didn't know I was behind the door. "She's legacy baggage," Ryan laughed. "Still uses Outlook. It's like keeping a fax machine for nostalgia." The other man chuckled. "Out with the old, huh?" "Exactly," Ryan said, sipping his cold brew. "This isn't 2012. We need people who move fast." I stood there, silent. Not angry, just steady. I'd built that company from dust. I'd taken one sick day in 9 years. I'd rebuilt the onboarding portal from scratch after a junior dev deleted the production environment during his ayahuasca retreat. But to him, I was baggage. That night, I sat in my car, opened the Notes app on my phone, and typed 3 words. Start the clock. The next morning, I called an attorney I'd worked with years ago, a quiet woman named Cynthia Marks, who specialized in real estate and corporate law. Her office was in a creaky craftsman house that smelled like old paper and printer ink. She read through the lease, flipping slowly, her glasses sliding down her nose. When she looked up, her eyes had that spark of professional disbelief. "They let this ride?" she asked. I nodded. "What does it mean?" I said. She leaned back, hands folded. "It means, Lauren, you don't just lease this building through your LLC, you control the lease. If they never reassigned it, they're tenants at will. If you invoke the exit clause, they have no standing." I blinked. "So I could terminate it?" "You could," she said, "or sell the LLC and transfer the property rights. Either way, you're the landlord." I sat there, silent, the weight of 9 years lifting off my shoulders like smoke. I wasn't powerless. I was holding the deed to his kingdom, and he didn't even know it. When I left her office that afternoon, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time in months, I could breathe. That night, I sat at my dining table with a mug of cold coffee, rereading the lease like scripture. The details were all there. A 5-year automatic renewal clause, a buyout option for $1, and no record of reassignment. Every clause was a quiet grenade Ryan had been walking over for months without realizing. I wrote down 2 lines from the contract in my notebook. Termination notice, 60 days written. Founder preferential purchase option, $1. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. I wasn't waiting to be fired anymore. I was waiting for the perfect moment. I gave myself one rule: no emotion, no recklessness, only precision. Ryan wanted a new era. I'd give him one, slowly, methodically. I started by re-establishing control over the systems no one else cared about, the boring, invisible ones that actually kept the company alive. I verified that all utility accounts were still under my LLC's umbrella. They were. I checked the property tax records and confirmed they were billed to Lauren Pierce Consulting, still current. Then I reviewed the building's security provider. The same small local company I'd hired years ago, still in business, still using the same admin login credentials I'd set up. I sent them a friendly email. Need to review our system access for compliance purposes. Please confirm current administrative contacts. Within an hour, I had confirmation. My credentials were still valid. That night, I updated the recovery email to my personal one. One subtle keystroke, and the infrastructure Ryan relied on was legally mine again. The next morning, the company's Slack exploded with another of his tone-deaf posts. Q3 is about trimming the fat and sharpening the edge, he wrote, attaching a GIF of a samurai sword unsheathing. Half the office reacted with fire emojis. I took a screenshot and labeled it Strategic Idiocy, Exhibit A. Whispers started to spread through the halls. Ryan was planning another realignment. The same script, dressed in new buzzwords: resilient restructuring, forward recalibration. I didn't need to ask questions. People brought them to me. Old colleagues quietly forwarded messages meant for inner circle eyes. A product manager DM'd me. FYI, they're talking about cutting you completely in the Q4 chart. Keep your head down. I smiled. They thought I was waiting to survive the wave. I was waiting for it to crest. 2 weeks later, my desk was moved again, officially for spatial flow optimization. Unofficially, I was exiled to a workstation wedged between the server closet and a stack of old monitors. The air was stale, the hum constant, the heat unbearable. I set a small cactus on my desk. It died in 2 days. I laughed quietly to myself. Nobody watched the server closet. It was the perfect hiding spot. From that cramped humming corner, I finalized my plan. I reviewed the LLC's charter and re-registered it online to confirm active status. It was still valid, never dissolved, the same corporate entity that held the lease. I reprinted the Articles of Organization, the EIN certificate, and the 2015 lease, all notarized. They looked ordinary, almost dull, but together they were dynamite. At the bottom of the lease, I underlined one line in blue pen. The premises may be repossessed at the sole discretion of the leaseholder upon written notice to occupant and filing of Exhibit C. Exhibit C. The clause I'd drafted years ago to simplify future transfers. Back then, it was just practical paperwork. Now it was a trigger. I called Cynthia again. If I wanted to buy the building under the founder clause, I asked, "What's the process?" "Simple," she said. "File a property acquisition notice with the county. Execute a $1 transfer between your LLC and yourself, and attach the original lease as proof." "And after that?" I asked. "Then, technically, you'd own the building," she said, her voice calm. "And they'd be your tenants, if you allowed them to stay." I looked out my car window at the dull glow of the office lights across the street. I could see Ryan pacing through the atrium, gesturing as if he was delivering another sermon. I whispered, "Not for long." The following week, I filed the paperwork, quietly. No one at Noventa knew that while they were clinking cold brews in the lobby for Innovation Wednesday, I was at the county registrar signing documents that made me the legal owner of the very building they occupied. The transaction cost exactly $1. Cynthia slid the form across the table, tapped the line marked Transfer of Property, and said, "Congratulations, landlord." I didn't smile. Not yet. I had one more move to make. Ryan was planning his next big announcement, another company-wide all-hands where he'd talk about agility and synergy like he'd personally invented the words. His assistant had already sent the invite. Quarterly Vision Kickoff. Atrium, 10 a.m. sharp. The timing was perfect. I circled the date on my calendar and wrote 2 words beside it. Delivery Day. I spent the days leading up to it tightening every loose end. I met with Chuck, the owner of the same local security firm I'd onboarded years ago. He still answered his phone like every call was a prank. "Lauren Pierce. Damn, been a while. What's up?" "Need the building access points reprogrammed," I said. "And keep it quiet." He hesitated. "Like stealth mode quiet?" "Exactly." By midnight Thursday, his crew had rekeyed every lock, updated the badge database, and reassigned administrative control of the security system to me. Every employee badge still worked, for now, but one command in the system could deactivate them all. I looked at Ryan's name on the list and smiled at the irony. The next morning, I filed a single page titled, "Notice of Lease Cessation and Premises Repossession." Legal, neat, final. I included a copy of the deed transfer and an attachment labeled Exhibit C, Declaration of Possession Transfer. It stated, in clean legal phrasing, that effective upon physical delivery to any current Noventa stakeholder, the building would be considered repossessed by the sole property holder, Lauren Pierce. That night, I sealed the documents in a heavy envelope, slid it into my desk drawer beside the humming server tower, and leaned back. The air smelled of dust and metal. I wasn't angry anymore, just still, focused. Ryan wanted spectacle. He'd get one, but it would belong to me. At 6:42 a.m. on the morning of the meeting, I sent a short email to our lead investor, Margaret Sloan, a woman with the composure of a federal judge and the patience of a guillotine. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but she'd once told me I was the only adult in the room. My email read, Subject, Exhibit C. Immediate review requested. Margaret, please find attached Exhibit C with supporting documentation. This pertains directly to today's 10 a.m. all hands. Review before 10:30. Regards, Lauren Pierce. I attached the deed, the termination notice, the acquisition clause, and the updated security logs. Time-stamped, certified. I clicked send. Then I chose my outfit, the same navy blazer I wore when we closed our first major contract. It wasn't sentimentality, it was armor. At 9:50 a.m., I parked across the street from the Noventa building, the one I now legally owned, and watched employees funnel in, smiling, clueless. Through the glass, I saw Ryan adjusting his headset microphone, rehearsing his grand reveal. I gave him exactly 10 minutes of peace. Then, at 10:20, I called Eddie's Express, a courier service run by a man whose motto was, "If it's legal, I'll deliver it. If it's illegal, I'll do it faster." I'd scheduled a timed drop-off, 10:29 a.m. sharp. Ryan's speeches always ran late. He loved hearing his own voice echo through the atrium. I arrived at 9:58, slipping into the back row behind a dying ficus. Folding chairs lined the room, swag tote bags on every seat. Trey, the new operations golden boy, was handing out branded notepads like party favors. No one noticed me. Perfect. Ryan stepped on stage at 10:08, wearing his trademark smirk. "Big day, big vision," he said, arms wide like a messiah of mediocrity. He launched into his usual buzzword soup: pivot, culture, transformation, evolution. I glanced at my watch. 10:26. 3 minutes. "Sometimes," Ryan said, grinning, Growth means letting go of what no longer serves the mission. His eyes flicked toward me. That smirk widened. I didn't move. Behind the glass doors, a man in a red windbreaker appeared, carrying a white envelope. Right on time. The courier didn't hesitate. He walked straight through the atrium doors, cutting through rows of employees like a ghost no one had invited. The white envelope looked almost harmless in his hands, but I knew better. Every sheet inside it was a loaded weapon wrapped in legal stationery. Ryan kept talking, too absorbed in his own voice to notice the shift in the room's energy. So today, he said, pacing the stage, marks a new era for Noventa Systems, one built on innovation, courage, and adaptability. He stretched the last word like it was an applause cue. But no one clapped, because all eyes had shifted toward the man in red. He stopped at the front row, leaned down, and placed the envelope into Margaret Sloane's hands. She frowned, glanced at the cinder line, and began to read. I inhaled slowly, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Ryan's words faltered. And that's why we, The microphone picked up the crack in his tone. Margaret stood. The paper in her hand trembled slightly, but her voice was sharp as glass. Possession of premises transferred. See Exhibit C. Silence detonated across the atrium. No one moved. A junior developer dropped his coffee. Ryan blinked at her like he'd just been spoken to in another language. I'm sorry. What? He stammered. Margaret didn't look at him. Her eyes locked on me. Lauren, is this accurate? I nodded once. Calm. Filed and recorded this morning, I said. Noventa Systems no longer holds a valid lease to this building. Gasps. Actual gasps. Ryan turned a shade of white I'd never seen on a living person. That's ridiculous. You can't. What does that even mean? He sputtered. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor just enough to echo. Clause 8.2, I said evenly. Founder preferential purchase option. Lease held by my LLC. Terminated. Property acquired. Deed notarized and filed. Margaret flipped to the page, read the clause, and nodded once. It's legitimate, she said to the room. Fully executed, fully binding. The locks have already been changed. The room dissolved into stunned whispers. She owns the building, someone muttered near the back. Since when? Another whispered. Since 2015, I heard an engineer answer. Her LLC was the leaseholder. The whisper network moved fast, people connecting dots they'd ignored for years. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This doesn't change anything, he said finally, voice cracking. We'll fight it. The board will fight it. Margaret turned toward him, expression like marble. You won't, she said coldly, because fighting this would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. You never verified the lease structure. You didn't even know who owned the premises. You failed due diligence, Ryan. He froze. The crowd's attention shifted, away from him, toward me. For the first time in months, I wasn't invisible. I was gravity. I walked to the front, heels clicking against the laminate floor, every step cutting through the silence. The lights above felt hot on my skin, the air thick with disbelief. I stopped in front of him. You run things here? I said quietly. Not anymore. Not here. Then I reached for my badge, the same plastic card that had been downgraded months ago when Ryan stripped my title. I walked to the glass doors near the exit, held it to the scanner. Beep. Green. The lock clicked open. I turned and looked at him. He stepped forward, thrust his own badge toward the reader. Beep! Red. No access. The silence that followed was absolute. He stared at the red light, frozen, waiting for it to change its mind. It didn't. He tried again. Another beep. Another red glow. A collective breath ran through the room like wind through dry leaves. Trey, his loyal shadow, stood by the coffee station, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. HR didn't move. Nobody did. Ryan finally dropped his hand, the badge still dangling between his fingers. He looked smaller now, like the air had gone out of him. Margaret turned to the crowd, her tone final. This building, she said, is no longer available for Noventa's operations, effective immediately. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked around that room one last time. The faces of people who'd whispered apologies, the ones who'd looked away, and the ones who finally saw me for what I was. Not legacy, not baggage. The landlord. When I walked out, the sunlight hit me full in the face, my badge still warm in my hand. Behind me, the glass doors sealed shut. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I already owned the ending.